FOG number 16 is Mitch Brennan. Mitch played 4 Origin games for Queensland, making his debut in the standalone game of 1981, the last before 3-game series were introduced. A Premiership winning player with the St George Dragons, Mitch started his senior career at Souths in Brisbane before joining the Dragons in 1978. In all, Mitch played 99 games in the New South Wales Rugby League competition with St George, South Sydney and Canberra. In the midst of that, Mitch returned to Brisbane to play 3 years and 58 games for Redcliffe, captaining the famous club. In his 4 Origin games, Mitch Brennan scored 3 tries. In 1979, Mitch was the leading try scorer in the New South Wales Rugby League competition with 16. He also scored a try in the Dragons' grand final win over the Bulldogs in the same year. Well, Mitch Brennan, thanks so much for your time. What does it mean to you to be a FOG?
Well, you know, when I first got selected, it was a great sense of elation to be chosen. I went down to Sydney, and a lot of people aren't aware of it, but there was a never to represent ban for, or not to represent ban for the first 4 years, I think it was, and that was part of my release to go. So when I got chosen for that, it was a great sense of elation. But since then, it's become more of a certainly a badge of honour, but something that I hold in high esteem. It's something that I feel at times when people invite me somewhere because I was a State of Origin player, that I need to uphold the traditions of the club and the state and be a good ambassador. It's been a wonderful opportunity to do that. So.
We'll get to the career shortly, but let's go back to the start. Mitch Brennan, growing up, where did you grow up and what was your younger life like?
Okay, I grew up in many different places, from New Guinea, throughout Queensland, different places down south. I first played football at Charleville. I was at Charleville State School and just fell in love with the game, and I wanted to play for Souths in Brisbane at the time because my big brother, while I was living in Charleville, he was living with my grandfather in Brisbane and he played for Souths, and he gave me his jersey with a magpie hair, and it was kind of like I'd never seen one before, and I just, from that. After that, my uncle, when he found out I was interested in footy, he took me to South Sydney games and things, and then South Sydney became my team.
So when did it get serious for you growing up? As a youngster, you mentioned your father was in the Defence Force and travelled quite a bit. Did that make it difficult for you to try and find a path to get to play at the senior level?
It not so much that. By the time I got to high school, Dad was out of the army, so we settled at West End, and then from there it was, the first choice was Davies Park, South, and so from 66 or 67 I'd been playing down there with the Magpies, and it just followed through. I did stop playing for a period because I was involved in music and acting, and I gave football away because most of the time I wasn't a regular in the first team. It would be on the bench, or at State High I played rugby, and I was always in the D's. I wasn't in the A's and so forth. So and then out of the blue, one of the Fijian players that was at South back in the 60s and 70s, he was coaching the under-23s, and he got me to come down to training, and played a game, and I wasn't very fit. And then the next week I was playing reserve grade, and the next week I was playing first grade. It just like bang, just happened so quickly.
So did you have a desire to reach the top in rugby league, or is it something that just happened and you then embraced it?
It was. Look, I love the game, and I used to do a lot of training. My younger brother Rowan was a terrific football player, superb athlete, and he was big on exercise science and training. And he was kind of like my role model, even though he was younger than me, and he used to get me training and so forth. But I just had other interests outside, and they were getting a foothold. I was starting to get purchase on a career in that other area. And it was my buddies that said, "No, come on down and play." Bada Basaga and Guda Guda, trying to get you to come down. So come on down, and it just kind of happened. Yeah, and then the guy that was managing me, basically he wasn't a big supporter of contact sport. I remember I turned up one day, the band was playing, and I had a big scar across my cheek, and he's going, "What are you doing? You're going to ruin your good looks," and but I love footy, so it didn't worry me. And then when I got chosen to play first grade, I was in a bit of a dilemma because we had a tour coming up, and he said, "Well, go and play football. You can always come back to this." So I did. So. Yeah.
How then did someone go from Davies Park to Cogra? And it wasn't the easiest of journeys because you became infamous before you'd even landed in Cogra through a trial match.
Yeah, the circumstances were a little bit different. Souths Brisbane, a great club. We had an issue with the finances, and the chairman of the club got myself, Greg Vivers, and Johnny Grant to his office. He had an office in town. And he said the club's broke, so we're going to cancel all contracts. How do you guys feel about that? And we thought, what can you do if the club's broke? They're broke. Well, Greg had a Queensland Rugby League contract, and Granny was an engineer with the council. Those guys were pretty well looked after, and I probably foolishly anchored a little bit on what I'm going to do with my football money. Not that you made that much in those days. And I said, well, I'll stay with the club. I won't go to another Brisbane club, but if I can go to a Sydney club, I'll go. And they said, fair enough. So Harry Barth had coached us at Souths in Brisbane a couple of years earlier. I gave Jack Gibson a call and asked if I could come down and have a tryout with South Sydney. And he definitely said, come on down. So I went down and things were going really well there. And then I just called in to see Harry Barth to say hi. Because I admired Harry, and he said, "What are you doing in Sydney?" I said, "I'm going to have a run with South Sydney." And he says, "No, you're not." He says, "Yeah, come on, you can join us in Grafton and come on down." And then moments before the game, he said, "Look, we're going to just call you Mickey Lane." I said, "Who's Mickey Lane?" He said, "Oh, it's where I used to live in England." And then things turned out. I scored a few goals, scored a few tries, kicked a few goals, and got noticed. And they had, in the local paper, it was Mickey Lane, playing there. But then I think it was one of the Ernie, I can't think of his surname, one of the...
Christensen.
Ernie Christensen in Sydney had a look at it. And he was a terrific sports journo. He followed the BRL, even though he was a Sydney paper. He goes, "That's not Mickey Lane, that's Mitch Brennan." So everything hit the fan. So.
And how did that impact you at the time? Because it's hard for people to understand now, someone playing in a match under an assumed name and thinking they could get away with it. It was quite controversial at the time.
It was, and then I felt that I was a bit betrayed by the club because they told me that my contract was cancelled, these are the facts. Senator McAuliffe said, "No, everybody's except yours." And I go, "What?" He said, "Well, we were going to offer you a contract," and I said, "Well, I think it's too little, too late." And because in those days, if you got to play in Sydney, then you're going to the next tier, and so I wasn't going to back down. So they fined the club, and then I found through the selectors in Sydney, because Harry was pushing. I was playing. I think I was holding my own down there, and Harry was pushing, and then it came out that part of the deal for him to release me was not to represent. So that was before State of Origin, but once State of Origin came in, that didn't matter anymore. So.
Looking back now, the timing was wonderful. You've joined St George as they're preparing to win a premiership of which you were a part, scoring a try in a grand final. Yeah. So here's a bloke from Davies Park, gone via Grafton as Mickey Lane, wins a premiership. What was that whirlwind all like to be there on grand final day and scoring in a grand final?
It was absolutely fantastic, and there are times when I'll have a flashback to that, and it is uplifting. I can say this though. One thing about Harry Barth was, it was like he invented the game, and he had a control on the guys. They called them Barth's Babes, the team, and at the time, I don't know if you remember, Mark, there was an American football video a promotional video called Seek and Destroy, and it's about linebackers, in defence, lining up the running backs and all the tight ends so that they target them, they can see the key indicators and then wipe them out. And it was an amazing film and very inspirational. Well, Roosters went out and beat Parramatta by a big score, and they were probably expected to lose. And they said, "How come you won that?" And they said, "Oh, we were really pumped up on that seek and destroy." And then you hear Manly say, "Oh, yeah, we saw that video, seek and destroy." And so I always remember Robert Stone, who's passed away now, Stoney and JJ, John Jansen, said to Harry, "When are we going to watch Seek and Destroy?" And Harry, the way he delivered this message was that those teams need that motivation. You guys don't. You're already there. So that's not going to, and the way he put it, and I haven't put it as good as he did, the way he put it, that in itself made you lift, and you felt bigger and stronger and better and confident. And it was amazing, the way he prepared us for that final, that grand final.
So premiership win with one of the most famous sporting teams in the country, and then you end up at one that's equally as famous, wearing that famous Cardinal and Myrtle. How'd you end up at Souths?
What happened was Bill Anderson was coaching South Sydney, and I had had a knee operation, had a cartilage removed. I had a little bit of a few issues with the management. Nothing that I would leave the club for, but I was playing on the wing at Saints. Had a couple of games at fullback, and I didn't mind. I mean, you're scoring tries outside wingers like Finchy and Quinny, and so you're scoring tries, and that's what you got to do. But the opportunity to move into the centres, and also a choice of fullback, which happened later, that was more attractive to me than the money, and so I went, and it was a wonderful experience. The team was put together. And I use this kind of loosely, the term. We were a team of misfits and ragamuffins and guys that were thrown out from other clubs, and we just, the bonding in that team was amazing, and we went on to win the Tooth Cup in the first year that I was there, and in the second year, halfway through it, we were actually leading the comp. Parramatta, who won the comp that year, could never beat us. We played them a number of times, and they never beat us once. But we just, through injuries and that, we couldn't sustain the winning momentum. So, yeah.
It must be said also in that time, of course, Graham Langland's infamously wore the white boots in the 1975 grand final, but you sort of continued the legacy, one of the first players to wear them full time. What was that like in that era where black boots were black boots and you didn't stray outside the line? How did that come about, and what was the reaction?
Yeah, I think the first coloured boots I wore when I was with Saints was red. Rocket Reddy and myself, we went with red boots from Adidas. They were our sponsors. And then when I was with South Sydney, the Ravini shoe company from America wanted to make inroads into Australia, and they picked myself, the halfback from the Roosters, Kevin
Junee or Hastings?
Hastings,
yep.
and Pricey, I think it was, might have been Pricey from Parramatta, were being sponsored. Well, those guys chose the black boots, but I said to the Ravini people, I said, well, look, if you want to make an impact, you come up with something like white boots or something, and so they did, and so they had a pair of white boots specially made for me. They didn't sell white boots, and so it was noticed. And it's funny, my wife will introduce me to people from her, circles, and then the husbands of those wives will go, "Oh, I remember him. He was fast and wore white boots."
It's hard for people that have grown up in this era to understand what a big thing it was back in the 70s to be different in that respect.
Yeah. It was noticeable, and got called a few names, but it didn't matter what I was wearing. I was going to get called names. But between that and the amount of times that's come up and Mickey Lane has come up, I've had people see me when I'm out socialising, whether it be a bar or a restaurant or whatever, and they'll come up and say hello, and they'll go, "Oh, I know you. Mickey Lane, but what's your real name?" It's just like they'll remember that, but
It's always nice to be remembered for
it
something.
It's lovely. Yeah. Yes, it is.
So you go to the Dragons, you win a premiership. You go to Souths, and you get selected to play State of Origin. So you've made a couple of really good decisions. Take us back to 1981. It's still a one-off match.
Yep.
Were there any expectations in your mind that you would play for Queensland?
No, none whatsoever. I did get chosen to play for New South Wales once, but then I was ruled out. I thought I was okay, but I found out I was ruled out with an injury, and then so I just, it wasn't something that burdened my mind. It was just, I mean, I was in an era where there were some bloody good players around, and so in the centres you got Mick Cronin and Steve Rogers, and so down there, and you got Mel and Gino up here, and Chris Close was playing then too. So no, it didn't. I didn't think so. When it did, it was, as I said, it was like a welcome and pleasant, surprise.
Well, what was the second year like, the build up to, we've had 1980 and Arthur revolutionising basically Origin. So what was it like being involved in game 2? What was the feeling, the mood in camp like?
It was terrific. Arthur Beetson, as I said, we had a conversation earlier, Mark. Arthur and I, we had a great relationship even before State of Origin, but it bonded even further with State of Origin. We had a lot of conversations outside of football. And one of the things that I saw in Arthur was his leadership qualities, where I noticed that he worked very subversely, making sure that everybody had a sense of belonging in the team, that nobody was an outsider, and it just worked so well, and we were just a unit. And we had some fun. I remember at a pre-game video, we're watching some of the players, and Ziggy Niscott was in the Blues team, and he played for Souths, and Wally said, "Hey, Mitch, what's that? Niscott, that winger?" And somebody said, "You mean Niscott?" He says, "Yeah, Niscott." And I said, "No, don't worry about it, mate. Don't worry about Niscott." He goes, "Why? Isn't he playing?" I said, "No, he's changing. He's changing his name." He says, "What? He's going to change his name?" I said, "Yeah, he's changing it to." His name was what was his name? I can't believe it. I forgot it. But anyway, I said he's changed his name to Greg to Dave. So and Wally goes, and that was the sort of fun we used to just have and. In camp,
And what was the game like?
The game was like a high level of focus. I always remember that high level of focus, and the almost like having to give signals because the crowd was so noisy, that you couldn't hear calls and so forth. Mal and I didn't stop talking, and we talked to the wingers, and it was at another level. It was just, you just went there. Yeah.
And you were only one of a handful of players from Sydney to play in that game. People tend to forget, I suppose, that in 1981, that Queensland side, the majority of the players were still playing here in Brisbane.
That's right. Yep, there was. That's right. I think there was myself. There was Kerry wasn't in that team. Rocket wasn't in the team, and we had Kinescu there, and at hooker. I'm just trying to think who the other. There was I think did Paul McCabe come that year or the next year? I'm trying to think about who was in the team.
I think there might have only been a couple. Yeah, it just shows you how strong
the BRL was.
Yeah,
and I think that the State of Origin series, helped that. It helped strengthen the local comp. And it was Ziggy Niscott was the guy I was trying to.
So you've represented Queensland at Origin. You're there at South Sydney. You were there via the Dragons and Souths in Brisbane. You said you were never going to play for another Brisbane club. So how did you end up at Redcliffe in '83?
Yeah, that's full circle. My first daughter was born in '82. I had wrapped everything up with Souths. I had actually... I'll share this, it's not well known. I'd signed a contract with the LA Express, the USFL, US Football League, and it never got off the ground. And so I was in limbo, there was no team. I just decided I was going to stop playing, just call it quits. And then Toss and I were talking, he said, "Well, come on down and watch the boys," so I came down. And he said, "No, you should be putting the boots on." So it was, he seduced me and got me down there, and because there was a lot of state origin players at the Redcliffe side. We had Muppet and Horse and Greg Kinescu, and it was Wally Fulton Smith eventually got there.
Almost like an origin side.
Yeah. And a great environment. It's great. It's one of the things. I played for a few teams, and you get competitive on the field. But when you get to, like, when I remember when I went to South Sydney, Peter Tunks pulled me aside, and we became pretty close, and he goes, when you played for Saints, he said, we thought you were the biggest so-and-so, getting around. He said, but you're okay, you're pretty, and that's what happens, like people get to know you and they find the real you, and I wasn't full of confidence to socialise when it came to socialising. I'm a bit of an introvert, and so I didn't.
Does that come back to moving from school to school, do you think?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And so people saw that as being, guy's up himself. But it wasn't that. I was happy to pitch in and help anybody at any time. So.
Well, you brought up the USFL experience, and I was going to touch on your American or Canadian football.
Yeah.
None of what has happened in your rugby league career, is it fair to say, may have happened if it wasn't for visa problems in Canada, because you went, mid-70s to trial for the Toronto Argonauts and actually made it? Yeah,
in 75, what had happened was I'd been spending time with college teams and NFL teams, training with them, and then one of the guys suggested I have a talk to Jay Albrecht, was a coach at Toronto. And so I did, and they put me through a whole series of agility tests and speed tests, what they call the combine score now. They didn't have it; it wasn't called that back then. And I was there with at the same time as a guy called Anthony Davis, a legendary college football player that was a Heisman Trophy winner, and he went on to Toronto, jumped out of the NFL draft and went to Toronto, and so I signed a contract that day. But I left my run too late to get my visa. 76 was the season I was supposed to play. 76 was the Montreal Olympics, and the quota was full on sports visas in Canada, so I had to wait a year. I did get a call from Vancouver the next year, but I didn't follow up on it. So,
and where did this interest come from? Because in those days, you didn't see the NFL or American football on Australian TV screens. Where did that interest come from?
My sister married a Canadian, and so I travelled to North America a fair bit, and I just got to know the game. He wasn't a football player; he was a horticulturalist and like a good athlete. He could have played footy, had the build and everything, but I just saw the game and I just enjoyed it. And my first interest was really sparked by Mark Harris when I found out that he was signed up with the Philadelphia Eagles, and then he went on to the Montreal Alouettes. And a lot of people don't know this, but they changed the rules in the CFL because of Mark Harris. It was one of the rules I have on kickoff, and he used to be able to place the kickoff ball to go over the dead ball, bounce in goal and go over the dead ball line, and so you got a point and you got the ball back. So they changed the rules in CFL. The rules in CFL are slightly different to NFL.
Yeah, and Mark has led the way for you to follow, and now it seems that every Australian athlete wants to, with Jordan Mailata leading the way with the Philadelphia Eagles.
And I love it when I see those guys. Yeah. And I felt a bit for Jared Haynes. I know some of those coaches, and I don't mind saying this publicly. I think the coach he had at San Francisco got his nose out of joint because he wasn't getting enough recognition for promoting Jared, and Jared was being recognised in San Francisco by the locals. They loved him. At the time he was there, his jersey number and name was the biggest merchandise sale out of all the other players, and so he kind of got cut from there. So, and the Sea Eagles looked at him, but I think they were pretty well established by that time. And Valentine Holmes, I honestly thought he was going to make it. He's a terrific athlete. He's got all the qualities of a good ball carrier, slot back or running back. The biggest thing, and a lot of people who have never played the game, and Val will be able to back this up, is the biggest thing between our two games is that you've got to learn how to follow and use your blocker. If you can't do that, you're going to get wiped out. And that's the biggest thing. Coming from a game where you've got to make sure you don't do that. So it becomes quite strategic, quite tactical.
So that was one part of your life as well. So we've had the Origin debut. What does it mean to you to have played in one game, but then over the next couple of years to be selected again and again and again, to end up playing 4 games in that era as a number, in different positions as well?
Yeah, look, I think a couple of things. I think going back to the first time I was chosen, I don't know if you would recall this, but Kerry Boosted, who had a great, in the first game, had a great game. And then the following season, they still had the regular interstate series, and he got chosen to play for New South Wales. Well, he's gone out and scored 3 tries for the Blues. Well, you think they're going to want him to come back and play for Queensland? And I say that jestfully. So maybe that got my in. Maybe the senator said, no, he's not coming back. So they gave him a little one-game ban. But, I know that, and I'm not trying to put myself down here, but I know that there was always injuries, and so it was the bounce of the ball and things that happened like that. I've missed it through injury, and I've got in through somebody else. But it was at any occasion, the opportunity to do it, to go and serve the state, to be a Queenslander is just, you're not going to knock it back. Yeah.
Did you know at the time who you were playing with and the era you're playing in? When you look around that Queensland side, as you reflect, do you maybe understand a bit more about the quality of the player that you're with? Because they were just your teammates then, weren't they? And
yeah, and it's, the question's well put. You don't know. Like, I'd already known Mel before State of Origin, and playing with Mel and a lot of the other guys I knew. It was just, they were just teammates, and you were a part of it. And it's you train as hard with the ball as you do without the ball, and you play. You're involved in the field whether you're with the ball or not. So you're just all one unit, and and I think a lot of those guys were similar to me in that when they played against better players, their own game lifted. That was their best games, and I can say boastfully that. When I played against Mick Cronin or Steve Rogers, they were my best games. And, whereas other players of less profile, sometimes I'd get caught out because I'd drop my guard, so.
Not everything's rosy for any sports person. So you finish your career in Canberra. Is it fair to say you weren't able to finish the way you wanted because, as a lot happens to a lot of sports people, that injuries catch up with you and etc. Is that one thing you look back on and wish you might have been able to finish the way you wanted?
Yeah, definitely. There's, there are times when you play with injuries, which was a big mistake for me. So that, that didn't help. I didn't plan to play with Canberra. I'd finished with Redcliffe, and then I'd taken on a position in the servicing the diplomatic corps in Canberra. And while I was there, Don Furner said, well, why don't you come and have a run? And I said, I've had it, mate. I've decided to.
Everyone seems to come and ask you to have a run.
Yeah, and then Don said, well, you get a chance to run around with your brother, because Rowan was one of the originals for Canberra. And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. So I did. Well, I ended up playing and being with the Raiders in some capacity longer than any other club, because I was with them on the field, off the field. First year I played. The second year, Don Furner said, I want you to hang the boots up. And I said, yeah, I'm happy with that, mate. No problem. He says, he said, I'm trying to get Wayne Bennett down here, and I want you to be his assistant and coach the reserves, He said, it'll be me and Wayne coaching. I said, okay. He said, don't say anything to anybody. I'll talk to Wayne and see how it goes. I said, all right, sounds good. I'd like that, because I was pretty keen to get into coaching. And then about 2 nights later, I get a phone call from Wayne, and he said, mate, I'm coming down to Canberra. I said, yeah, I heard. And he goes, so listen, I want you to hang the boots up, and I want you to come on board, back us up, and and then take on the reserve for me, reserve side. And I said, okay, yeah, I'm looking forward to doing something like that, mate. That'd be great. And he goes, yeah, all right, well, don't mention anything. I'll have a talk to Don about it. And I thought, I think I got this job. So I ended up, coaching that 1 year. That was 87, and then. If you remember, in 88, Tim Sheens came down, Tim came in, he was going to do a clean sweep of everybody and put his own staff in there. But we ended up going and have breakfast together, and he said he'd like to keep me on, and which was great. But then Mel broke his arm pre-season, and Tim came back and said, I need you to put the boots back on. We're short of outside backs. So I didn't hesitate. I felt good. I had a year off. Body felt good. The year started well, but there was a few things at a personal level that happened to me through the year, not to make excuses. I kind of didn't give enough attention to being a footballer at that level. And I think it reflected in my performance. And so, yeah, there was no other option for me to, I mean, I was 34, 35 at the time, so.
And the coaching there, and then you ended up in England with Wakefield. How did you take the coaching? Was it what you expected, or?
Oh, look, I didn't have any problem there. I've got a background in behavioural science and behavioural management, and I'd done a lot of coaching, not at that level, but I went in and one of the first things I did was reset the whole culture at the club. And then that took a while. I think in our first 12 games over at Wakefield, we lost everyone except maybe 3 games. And I was getting people at the ground saying, "Go home, Brennan, we don't need you Aussies here," and which was and I was a single dad in those days. My kids were with me, and then the chairman and the board came to me and they said, "Oh, can you back off on your training? The players look really tired." And I said, "Yeah, because they're not fit. They're not fit." And so. I just persevered with it, and then the next 12 games, the first 12 we only won 3 of them, and then the next 12 we won straight. And I remember we played Huddersfield in the last round, and we knocked Darryl Vandervelde was coaching Huddersfield at the time, and we beat him 18-0. And he came to me after the game. He says, "You bugger." He said, "You've just cost me a bonus getting into the finals." I said, "You should have called, mate." And then the mayor gave me a key to the city, so everything just turned around,
Yeah.
And then the following, we had a break, and then we went into off-season training. First time ever in the club's history they've ever done it. And then pre-season, I took the team to Ireland. And had a training camp over there. They've never done that, and it just set us up so well for the next year. And then the following year, won the division championship, so it was great.
How's life after football been for you?
It's been great. Because when I was coaching in Wakefield in the off season, I'd go and coach in California at El Camino College. I was a defensive backs coach. And so my kids are going to school in England, going to school in America, coming back to Australia for Christmas, New Year, then going back to England, starting all over. And then after I finished with Wakefield, I thought, hang on, I'm doing what my dad did to me. So I just stopped, anchored myself in Brisbane, and let the kids finish high school and uni. I got back into what I used to do. It was back into acting and filming. Did some stunt acting and stuff like that, and then through there I met my wife, and so everything's turned out rosy. So.
Who's had the biggest influence on your career?
I've just been so fortunate, Mark, with with the different coaches that I've had. Harry Bath, Jack Gibson, even though he didn't coach me directly, I've spent a lot of time in conversation with him, and Wayne Bennett, and just conversations with other people, and you go and talk to them and train with people. Even Sats, spent some time with Sats, which was very rewarding. I guess I'd have to say Harry Bath, just a game legend. He was originally a Souths Brisbane player, went down to Balmain. He was the one that got Arthur to come down to Balmain. So there's a lot of connections, there.
Synergies there. Yeah. How do you reflect on your career? I know a lot of former players don't like necessarily thinking about what they've achieved, but when you sit in this room and you see the company that you're in and you look back on your career now, a Premiership winner, a FOG, you've travelled the world in multiple sports, etc. How do you reflect on your achievements?
It's positively and with a lot of satisfaction. There are times when I'm watching, my grandkids will put on a game on YouTube or something like that, highlight game, and I look at my performance and I could see what I'm doing wrong and what I've done. It's like I'm my biggest critic, my own biggest critic. You know, there are things that I've learned, you know, since I played about how to play certain defensive patterns and how to, you know, different drills that I've put together that have worked for me when I've coached. Why didn't I do that when I was playing? But I look back on it with a sense of satisfaction and gratitude. You know, that it was the guys I played with and the people who helped me along the way, you know, had my back. And so, yeah, full of friendships, just to this day still, you know. So, yeah, no. And yet I look at my whole life and it's only been a little segment in my life. You know, it's just been crazy. Like I'll be working overseas and with some guys that might be from Belgium or Canada or somewhere, and then after we get to know each other, they've Googled you, and they'll come back and they'll turn up at breakfast and we'll go, "How's Mickey Lane this morning?" You know, like it's just like, oh no, you know. So yeah.
FOG number 16, Mitch Brennan. Thank you so much for your time and congratulations on a wonderful career.
Wonderful, thanks, mate. I enjoyed that. That was great.
Thanks for watching this episode of the FOGS Queenslander podcast. If there's a FOG you want to hear from, leave a comment to let us know. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our videos.